the DB2 Tech Talk series. Today's topic is data archiving best practices. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now, I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Serge Rilo. Thank you, sir. You may begin.
Hello and welcome for joining us today. My name is Serge Rilo. I'm the host for the DB2 Tech Talk series, which is formerly known as DB2 Chat with the Labs. I'm the SQL architect for DB2 for Linux, Unix, and Windows. Let me introduce Eric Nyberg as the presenter for the call today. Eric is the program director for Infosphere Information Governance Solutions. Eric will be talking about data archiving best practices that make it easier for you to balance competing objectives like performance SLAs, data growth, compliance, and data protection and data retention needs. You will be able to download the deck if you're dialing in from home at ibm.com/db2/labchats. Note that this is a plural, so LABCHATS at the end, or you can go to ibm.co/ttfilemar, so that's ibm.co without an M, the /TT as in Tech Talk, plus the word file, plus MAR as in March. Please hold your questions from the phone until the end when we open the phone lines for questions, but you can ask on the webcast. You can ask questions by sending them to the Q&A group on the right side. There's a little speaking bubble. You can click on this and then pick a Q&A group to send your questions to throughout when you encounter them, and then we will then go through these questions at the end. Okay, so now it's up to Eric to start his talk.
Great, thank you very much, Serge. And I see here from the list there are people from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to folks, and thanks for taking your time to chat with us today. We're going to talk about a few different things and really focus in on kind of how do we satisfy some of those issues. We'll talk about some of the challenges that we see with the continued extreme growth that we have when it comes to data. Excuse me. What organizations are doing, how are we defining data growth management, and what is archiving, and we'll finish up. And I'll really tell stories throughout. I won't have any success stories really at the end, but really I try to kind of sprinkle them throughout as we talk. So managing data growth continues to be a huge dilemma, a huge problem. As you can see here, and this is based on survey data, that we're continuing to be challenged by the things that data growth impacts. When we think about where we're spending our time, what we're doing, performance is a huge time place that we're spending. And we're trying to improve performance of our applications. We're improving the performance of our databases. We're looking for opportunities to improve that performance and satisfy customer satisfaction and so on. Yet we continue to struggle. And really, if I look at this entire list, this whole list is tied to data growth and the growing amount of data. Right? Delivering improved performance, delivering higher availability, high data volume growth, obviously that one is. Increasing data management costs. The more data we have, the more it costs to manage. It becomes harder and harder to upgrade the more we have to move, and so on. So you kind of get the idea there. But, you know, what are we doing to respond to this data growth? Often, and this is, if I was to be showing this on a PowerPoint slide, you'd see this kind of build out. And what we do is we continue to add hardware capacity. We continue to partition our databases and so on. We do compression. And those are short-term fixes, but they're still getting that growth. It's still adding to the cost. It's still impacting performance, and even worse, it's hurting our ability to deliver the next business value to our systems and to our applications. So some of the impacts on growth, and you can see some examples here from some organizations. Mid-American Energy, it became increasingly difficult to provide the appropriate service levels to our team. Our team didn't feel that we could even, with the existing system performance, right, keeping historical data in the production environment indefinitely would only weaken their ability to accommodate new business growth, and so on. And you can read these. I don't need to read all of these to you. But at the end of the day, what's happening is we're not able to upgrade quickly. We're not able to run our batches at the end of a quarter. We're not able to report when we need to. I was just reading an article online this morning, actually, of an organization who's having to delay their quarterly SEC filings because they weren't able to get all of their data calculated quickly enough. Right? All this data growth, all that we're having to deal with, becomes critical to our success. So cost, performance, compliance, they continue to help us struggle or cause us to struggle today. Often when I talk to customers and I go out and I'm meeting with clients, I'll ask them the question, well, how much does your data cost? How much does it cost you to store the data? And they quickly go to, well, data's cheap, storage is cheap, it costs us $10 to $20 a gigabyte or what have you, and it's not a big deal. But that's one little cost. Right? If you look at this, think about it, the storage itself is only actually about 20% of the total cost. You're paying for hardware, you're paying for software, you're paying for power, you're paying for air conditioning, you're paying your teams to spend their time managing this growth and so on. That's where the expenses come in. And we need to deal with that increasing cost and trying to reduce that. As we've already talked a little bit about, the poor application performance. How do we deal with that performance and improve performance rather than let the growth of data reduce our performance? And lastly, we need to manage risk and compliance. What do we do with data once it's served its purpose? Can we get rid of it? How do we get rid of it? And so on. And we really know these are issues, yet organizations continue to struggle. We continue to struggle with managing that growth. You can see some statistics here. Increasing costs, 3 to 10 times the cost of managing storage over the cost to procure it. So it's not about the storage. It's about all of those other things that have impact. Performance, 80% of the time DBAs spend weekly on disk capacity issues. It's over 250 hours, the amount of time needed to run daily batch processes. The performance of our systems, the performance of our applications aren't just impacting our ability to execute, they're impacting our staff, our ability to do our jobs. And lastly, 50% of firms retain structured data for more than 7 years. 57% of the firms use backup for data retention needs. So what happens during an audit? What happens during a lawsuit and so on? And we'll talk about some of those issues and concerns. If I was in front of you in person, I'd ask the question, how many of you have a keep everything forever strategy or lacks thereof when it comes to data? But we see this all the time. Right? I love this cartoon because this is exactly what happens. We keep everything forever because we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what we can get rid of. We don't know how to get rid of that data and so on. And what that's doing is it's having those impacts. And so what we need to do is start to put a plan in place, start to put policies in place around storage of data, how long we're going to keep that data, and when we can get it out of our production systems and into Tier 2 and 3 storage, or even off to tape and disk, because we need it for maybe retention purposes, but it's no longer adding value to the business. We need to be able to archive that data to help reduce costs and improve that performance, and lastly, minimize risk. So, archiving questions to consider when you're thinking about archiving. What is it that I need to do? Right? What data should I have? How long do I need to save it? Depends on my industry. I work with some industries. You saw a quote earlier from American Electric Power, for example, AEP. They generate nuclear power. So they have to store data for 50 years plus the half-life of the nuclear power they're generating. Basically forever. where it's associated with that. Other organizations, it's 7 years. Some it's 10 years. Some it's 12. So we need to understand that and define how long are we going to keep it. And it doesn't have to be the same for every system. It depends on the reason it was captured, how it was captured. But if we don't need it, we've got to get rid of it, because if we don't get rid of it, we're liable for it. How am I going to find the data if I need it? Something to consider when we're thinking about archiving. How do I ensure that I preserve the data for e-discovery audits, kind of tied to that last bullet? What do I do with the data when I no longer need it? How do I dispose of it? What is the most appropriate solution to meet my archiving needs? Kind of an obvious question there. And what is the cost-benefit analysis? How do I start to build out that business value benefit? So one of the things we need to consider when archiving is what I call a business object, or a logical entity, right? In our data modeling world, I would call this a logical entity. How do I start to look at this across systems and systems of systems? Remember, when I think back to my days, and just some background on me, prior to joining, I joined IBM via Rational, the Rational acquisition. Prior to that, I was a product manager for a small company called LogicWorks. We had a little tool called Irwin, a data modeling tool that many of you are probably familiar with. Been acquired a few times since. But when I was the product manager, we used to talk about the application or the database, the application, the database. And we'd go in and talk to clients, and I'd work with clients who owned the database. Well, that no longer exists, right? We now have systems and systems of systems, and they're integrated and interrelated across these systems. So how do I understand that? And more importantly, as I'm working for compliance purposes, for example, I need to store that business object. I need to keep customer together, whether it's in one database or across 5, whether it's one technology or 5. And I need to be able to understand how that information is related and interrelated across those systems. As you can see here, for example, a DBA view, referentially intact, right? Worrying about referential integrity, understanding the metadata, what's related, and so on. At a business level, I need a snapshot across that. And now as I'm archiving, or say I'm upgrading a system, or maybe I'm even doing consolidation. So we've decided as an organization we're going to move to SAP. And we've got these older systems, we're going to move some of the data, we're going to archive some. I can't change that data. If I need that data for compliance purposes, the minute I go and change that data, I potentially change its original business context. If I change that and I get audited, I may, I'm not saying you will, but you may be out of compliance and fail that audit. So we need to be able to retain that data in its context, which means I need to understand how this is related and interrelated across these systems and systems of systems. It starts with understanding the information. How is it related? We often, as you know, turn off things like constraints for performance purposes. Again, back to performance. So how do I know what's related? Because if I'm going to archive that data from across those systems, I need to understand that. InfoSphere Discovery will help me to do that. It will help me to understand how that data is related across systems. It's not analyzing the database itself, but actually the data within the database. And why is that important? If I analyze the database structures and constraints are turned off, how do I know what's related? Yeah, I might be able to use names of columns and so on, but we often change names across databases. Certainly as we go across different database systems, maybe I've got DB2Z and DB2 sitting out on a Unix box. Often my names are different there because of the constraints on those different systems. Throw in another database and so on, and now it becomes even harder. So what we do with InfoSphere Discovery is actually analyze the data. Look at the data itself across those systems and systems of systems. And if I see Eric Neighbor show up here and there and another place, I now know those things are probably related. And I need to draw those lines, draw those inferences to ensure that I'm looking at this information holistically. So when I think about it, a complete business object, what is that? So you can see here, and it's probably a little bit hard to see on your screen, but what hopefully you're able to see, I've got my customer number, my customer name, and order number, and product, and customer number, and order amount. They're sitting in 3 different databases on 3 different system types, but now I want to archive that information as a complete business object. As I pull that together, some data gets removed. Right? As you saw, the customer number and the customer name moved over into that archive, but it was also retained in the production database. I can't just remove John Smith from my production database because he's still a customer. But I don't need that order that was 3 years old. Right? That order number was moved over as well and removed from that production database, as was the customer number and order amount, because those things are no longer needed in that database in the production system. So I can move those over and store them in the archive all together. So now I've stored together John Smith, his customer number, his order amount, his order number, and the product that he purchased. No longer taking up valuable production database space and retaining it in that archive, but retaining it in its original business context, so I can now go out and look at John's information at any time. You can see all that information here in that archive. I need to be able to model that business object. In InfoSphere Optum, we can build those models. So InfoSphere Discovery discovers all of that information. Now, I may already have it in a model. Maybe it's in InfoSphere Data Architect, for example. Well, the front end to InfoSphere Optum Data Growth Solution is Data Architect. Data Architect is embedded in as Optum Designer. So what you're seeing here is actually a view of Optum Designer where I'm designing those relationships across those systems and understanding those tables. This could have been populated via a reverse engineering. Maybe I already have the data model. Maybe we inferred relationships based on constraints and names. Or maybe Discovery went out and looked at all of these systems, populated it that way, and pushed it into Oracle Optum Designer to ensure that I now have those relationships built. As I define those relationships, I can see within the screens how those relationships will be walked. Right? Are they transversed? What type of relationship? Where is the starting point? Here, in this case, it's orders. And then I'm walking up to customer and down to detail and so on. Those things are related. And my selection criteria in this case is going to be based on the orders because I'm pulling X orders to pull that out. I want orders and the things related to it. So hopefully you can see all of that here. Additionally, I can start to look at the entities themselves and understand my data types. Here you can see the selection criteria. We're going to pull orders that are dated prior to, in this case, it looks like 3 years ago. So we're going to archive all orders older than 3 years ago. In that archive, we will include order ID, customer ID, order date, order time, freight charges, the salesperson, and the order posted date, and you can't see the rest because the screenshot was cut off. And then we're going to drive those forward. Here we can classify that information. So customer orders 3 years or older, you can see here, we've named it. We start to create that query and run that report. So now I can store that data all together in a single place. It can be in a database. It can reside on disk and so on. You'll see a little bit more of that as we move forward. So when I think about all of this, here's what's really happening. Right? I've got my production system. And in this production system, I've got lots and lots of data. Some of it's active, some of it's really not active. It's stored there because we've got nothing else to do with it. We've got that, and a miracle happens philosophy, if you will. but I now need to do something with that information. I need to get rid of it. I need to store it. I need to keep it. I can't just throw it away. I need it for compliance purposes and reporting and so on, but I don't need it taking up my production system. So we archive that data. We move that data from production into that archive. Now, in some cases, let's use an example of a telco. Right, we all have cell phones this day. It's hard to find somebody that does not have one, although I do know a few. We have our cell phone. We're a customer of a cell phone company. We've now moved because I can move my number with me to a different cell phone provider or mobile provider. And I take that number with me. And I've been gone for 3 years, so I've now been removed from the production system. You still need to store my data, but it can be moved into that archive. Well, 3.5 years later, I get a great offer to come back. Now I can selectively restore Eric's information from the archive back into production because he's still are now a customer again. So we need to be able to restore, but we don't want to have to restore the entire archive. Oh, my goodness, right? Bringing in 3 years' worth of data. All we want to do is say, take Eric and Eric's information and bring it back in. So it provides me the ability to do that. We also need to be able to get to that data, whether it's in the database or in the archive. And we can't rely necessarily on the application. Why? Maybe that application was retired. Maybe that application's been upgraded several times and it's no longer in sync. So I need to provide a universal access to that data without requiring the application. Now, I may use the application, but I may want to use report writers like a Cognos or a Crystal. I may want to just write SQL queries against it as well. But while we're moving that data, we need to be able to get to it. We need to ensure, this is a policy, right? When we think governance, we think policy, provide access to archive data without requiring the original application. So you kind of get the idea here of how this all plugs together. Here you can see the actual archive starting to run. So what we're doing here is looking across, and these are different databases as we're pulling this information together. You can see Optum's pulling it from, initially we got the relationships from Optum as well as from Discovery. We've discovered that data. We've then gone in and started to archive different tables, and you can see these tables are existing in different places. Some are on a distributed platform, some are in Z. And what are we doing? We're archiving that data. Some of it we're still extracting. Right? We're in the process of the extract and then the insert into wherever that archive will exist. So you can start to see the services and the logs that are occurring. And then once it's all complete, you get that confirmation. Once the archive has completed, you can see the process. Right? So my service, customer orders 3 years and older, was run on Monday, March 3rd, and here's how it was run, and here are my statistics. The output, right? We archived 8,200 records, none failed. We archived from that particular table 510 from another, 18,000 from another, and so on. So I can see this, and I can keep these reports, again, for my audit trail. And what you can also see here is that was a new service that we ran, that customer orders 3 years and older. But we've also run continuously other archives at the same one over and over again. So in many cases, we'll set up that we run the archive as a batch. Maybe it's monthly, maybe it's weekly, maybe it's quarterly. We have one customer. They're actually, there's a great white paper on this called High Volume Data Archiving. I think that's the name, and you can get it from our website. And in this white paper, it talks about a client. They're a telco, and they have a zero growth policy in their call center. So their call center has a zero growth policy, which means they do not allow to add extra disk, extra hardware, and so on. Yet they need to store data, in their case, for 7 to 10 years. So what do? They've analyzed the different sets of data, the types of calls that come into their call center. They know with 90+% accuracy what types of calls come back and what types of calls never return. And they know those ones that never return, which is the majority of the calls, they can archive that on a daily basis. They don't need that data in the production system. They need to store it. They need to keep it, but it doesn't need to be in production. So they're able to move that off. The data that can't be, they keep until whatever time period they set. And so they do what they call high-volume archiving. They archive actually on a daily basis. Now, this is rare. I don't want you to think that everybody's archiving daily. That in most businesses, that doesn't make sense. In this case, it does. And they do different things depending on their systems as well. But you're putting schedules in place, and now you're constantly archiving. Maybe it's data that's over 3 years old, and we're going to do it on a monthly basis, for example. I can also go in and browse the archive. Now, the archive file is secured and protected, so you need to be able to log in. Certain things can be suppressed and so on. But I'm able to now go in and browse the archive. Why would I want to do this? Well, maybe I'm trying to search it. Often it's done in the early stages where I'm validating that the archive was successful and that the data that came out I needed to come out, or the right data came out. Sometimes it's because I need to go and find a certain piece of data as well. But we give you the ability to browse that archive directly within the product itself, within InfoSphere Optum Data Growth Solution. Now, I can also use those report writers and so on as we talked about. So we want to leverage the cost of effective storage. We've talked a little bit about this. There's a new report out that I just recently read from Gartner Research that talks about the cost of storage. And you can tell I actually talked to the analyst, the researcher that wrote it, because there's definitely some confusion in reading the article or reading the paper. And when I started talking to him, I was trying to figure out, so how much does it really cost me? And he really couldn't tell me a black and white answer, even on average, because it was well pre-RAID and post-RAID and fully loaded. And I was trying to get to what's a fully loaded cost. I don't want to know just the disk. I want to know how much does it really cost, fully loaded, for me to store a terabyte worth of data. And it certainly varies, but it's going to vary based on so many different factors. The city you live in, or the city you work in, right? How much does the power cost? How big is the space, and so on? And I understand that. And it was just interesting. They're writing a lot of this research, but they weren't able to answer really the basic questions I guess I would have expected them to have understood. So when we think about the cost of effective storage, it's about moving it out and, again, putting policies in place to ensure the high performance and the low cost of the data. Right, we want to move that data from the production database, maybe after 2 years, and move it out into an archive that's just still sitting in a database. Maybe after 4 years, we move it to online storage, like an IBM RS-550 or an EMC Centera and so on, have it managed out on an actual machine. And then over time, maybe after 6 years, we move it to disk or tape or optical and so on, because now I no longer even need to get to it except for maybe if there was a lawsuit that came up. I'm not even reporting on it. I just need to be able to show the auditors that this data still exists. So again, back to accessing the archive, and we'll talk a little bit about more about why this is important in a minute. You can see here, I can go in and say, let me look at person, and I can query a specific name, a specific title, a job description, and so on, and query that archive. So I can go in and start to look at the actual archive. I know the types of files, the columns, for example, in this case, that are in that archive. Now I can query specific examples and pull that in. But when it comes to retiring applications, most data must be retained. So I talk to a lot of customers who say, well, we're in the process of retiring or consolidating applications, right? We don't generally just retire to retire. Usually that business process which was automated, is consolidated into something else, and therefore we retire. Well, what often happens? I met with a lady at a bank actually here where I live up here in Boston recently, and she was responsible for two things: application consolidation and retirement, and Basel II compliance, financial industry compliance. And it was a really interesting conversation because the first thing I asked her was, well, what do you do with the systems that you retire? How do you ensure access to the data? You need it, obviously, for Basel II compliance. She said, well, what we do is we turn the system off, and we record all of the requests for about 6 weeks of systems that have now broken. And after those 6 weeks, we now know what was related to it. And then we can fix all of those and reroute those queries. Okay, that's interesting, all right, and not surprising. We don't know how everything is integrated and interrelated. That's why products like Infosphere Discovery are so critical. I then asked her the next question, well, what do you do when you retire the system? She said, well, we just turn it off, and if we get audited, we turn it back on and run reports. Well, they're setting themselves up there for failure, because the auditors aren't going to accept that, because what if it doesn't come back on? A great study we did, I mentioned American Electric Power earlier. Forrester Research actually did a white paper on them. They didn't name the company, excuse me, but that's who it's about, and it talks about how they had failed audits. Now, they, in their instance, have to store data for 50 plus years. And what they were doing is every time they upgraded, they were using PeopleSoft. And every time they upgraded their PeopleSoft application, they would just keep the old data in that old version and only move the necessary data to the new version. All right? That makes total sense. But they weren't archiving the old version. They were just keeping it in the old versions of PeopleSoft. So their auditor, Deloitte & Touche, came in, and Deloitte came in and said, okay, show me all of your data for the past X number of years. They said, well, here it is in PeopleSoft 3 and 3.5, and now we're on version 7. They said, well, does the vendor still support version 3 and 3.5? They said no, and the auditor then, Deloitte, said, thank you very much. You've now failed your audit. Here's your red stamp. Why? Well, because they were storing it in a format that they couldn't guarantee access to the data. They no longer could guarantee access to the data. So what they do now is they have policies in place where they archive the data in a format using Infosphere Optum that is application independent. So now they still do their upgrade. They don't want to move all of that data to the upgrade. But every time they upgrade, they archive the data so they're able to fully retire those systems. Now, there's a few pieces to this, right? Why are we retiring the systems? To cut costs. Well, if we keep the system around to retain the data, we didn't cut the costs. Maybe we cut some, but certainly not as much as we could. So we need to be able to retire those systems, and they use Optum to do that. We need to govern the life cycle for retention and disposal. We need to know what we can get rid of, what we can't get rid of, how long do we need to keep it, and so on. So many customers I talk to have a policy or a lack thereof that is we keep everything forever because they don't understand their data, they don't know what they can and can't get rid of, and they haven't put the policies in place because they don't understand it. They don't understand what they need, what they don't need, and so on. They're also not defining those common policies. You know, for example, I've got a customer that we're working with who they're in the process, this is an application retirement issue, but they've got a data retention issue as well. They're being sued right now for marketing to minors. Here's one of their problems. The way they define minor differs from system to system to system. Some are 15, some are 16, some are 18, some are 21. So they didn't even know what data to pull from their systems. Then they had stored data, even though they needed to keep it for 7 years, they were storing some data for 10 and 15 years. Guess what? That data is now part of the lawsuit because they still have it, even though it never would have been if they would have gotten rid of it because they didn't need to keep it. So we need to put policies in place for legal purposes, for retention purposes, for cost and performance purposes to get rid of data if we don't need it. So we need to ensure that our archiving strategy supports data retention, litigation hold. Can I put that data on hold, and how do I get rid of it over time? How do I, at a legal level, make sure we have the information, at an IT level, make sure we keep our costs down, manage our performance, and so on. So here you saw this diagram earlier. It differed a little bit. You see now legal hold and trash. We archive that data and we move it over into the archive just like we did before. All right, so now we're archiving the data. But now a lawsuit comes up and John Smith is suing us. Well, we can't get rid of that archive, and this isn't the easiest thing, and I apologize to show on a slide, so hopefully you see now down below John Smith and all of his information is down in that legal hold box. We've now put it on legal hold, but using Optum, we don't want to take it out of the archive, because that archive we still need. We still need to keep that data for that 7+ years. So we've now segregated John's information, taken a copy of it, and put it on legal hold, while retaining the data about John in that archive. Now, during this process of legal hold, our 7 years comes up. We can't get rid of John's data because it's on legal hold, but it no longer needs to be retained in the archive, so we can also get rid of it from the archive, as you see. So it's now disappeared from the archive, moved into trash, yet it's still sitting in legal hold because we need to retain John's data. So hopefully this makes sense. We start to put that process and enforce the process of moving data from production to non-production. Those archives can be, this is a simple example, but it could be across multiple archives. Some of John's information may be 3 years, some may be 5, some may be 7 years old. So it could be sitting in different archives, maybe some on bits, some on tape, some in database, and so on. Over time, something happens that we have to put John's information on legal hold, and either at the end of that process or sometime during that process, some of that data has expired, so we want to take it out of the archive so we no longer have that responsibility. So leveraging an effective data growth management strategy across the enterprise can help you to reduce costs, reduce the hardware, software, storage costs as we talked about, improve application performance. The less data we have, the better our systems perform, and minimize risk across these systems. What InfoSphere Optum helps me to do is intelligently archive the data to improve application performance and support that data retention and those policies. With InfoSphere Discovery, we can really discover and identify data record types, what we're going to archive across whatever data source you have, even if it's sitting in IMS, for example, or in VSAM. We can capture and store historical data in its original business context, right, those logical entities or business objects, if you will, so we can maintain the referential integrity of the data, but also maintain its original business context because the laws say we have to. We can ensure application-independent access of the archived data via those multiple access methods, whether it's ODBC or JDBC or XML or report writers or the original application itself. But it doesn't have to rely on that application, which is critical to your success. We can support those data retention policies to automatically and consistently across the enterprise. We need to keep it. We don't need to get rid of it. If it has to be put on legal hold, put it on legal hold until the time is up. And we can support custom and packaged ERP applications across those environments. So whether it's PeopleSoft or Siebel or Amdocs and so on, we understand those data models. Because those data models, as you know, are very different from a traditional custom written application. And if you don't understand that data model, data about Eric can live in 12 different places. And if I don't understand that model, it's very difficult for me to ensure I'm storing all of Eric's information together. We actually have, for Oracle applications, something called application repository analyzer, which will help to analyze a repository to understand all the customizations that you've made. Know what those customizations are, and feed that information into Optum so that now we're able to archive that data, store that data based on all the relationships that have been created since you purchased that application. Because we all know we customize those applications. It's hard to understand that data model. If we don't understand that data model, it's going to be near impossible to support it. So what are we hearing in the market? InfoSphere Optum is by far the leader in the market. A 2010 study, which actually came out in 2011, don't ask me why, but IDC's number reporting, 2009 numbers come out in 2011, that showed a 56.2% market share for Optum across the entire InfoSphere Optum product line. Even more impressive, a vendor study came out from Gartner in August of 2011, so only 6 or so months ago, showed InfoSphere Optum at an archiving level had a 76% market share. So really, IBM is the market leader with significantly more market share than the next competitor. And lastly, Forrester Research, today IBM continues to lead the industry with the most comprehensive data archiving solution and largest install base. IBM customers spoke highly of IBM solutions' reliability and performance. And this was Noel Johanna talking to our clients, not them listening to us, but what they're really saying and what they're hearing from the market itself. So here you can see that study that I referenced that Gartner did, showing that 76% market share and 71% when it comes to total number of customers. What Gartner saw was IBM enjoys the largest market share of all vendors profiled in this research, and certainly a dominant market share, although I don't know where we can say that in print. InfoSphere Optum supports both mainframe and open system environments, and many of IBM's customers are using it in those heterogeneous environments. Because I have yet to find a customer that has just one database. If you're going to put retention policies in place, you need to have common policy across those systems, in which case you need technology that supports those heterogeneous systems. And lastly, customers cite a small company feel when they were asked to describe their interaction with the sales force from InfoSphere Optum. So yes, we're IBM. Yes, we're 400 and something thousand people strong. But we continue to support the technology. We continue to drive this technology forward. Right? Much of this technology came from an acquisition about 4 years ago from a company called Princeton Softech. But at IBM, we continue to invest in those acquisitions. We're integrating it into the rest of the portfolio with things like InfoSphere Information Server, with DB2, with Informix, with our business glossary, with our data stage, with InfoSphere Guardian, with InfoSphere Master Data Management, with Netezza, and so on, and bringing that together. We continue to invest there and make sure that we can support our clients. This is one of the things that impresses me. So, I've been in and out, or in the industry for quite a time, and generally when I look at a database vendor, they build technologies and tools to support them. IBM builds and acquires technologies to support our clients. We continue to invest heavily in ensuring that we have the technology in place to support what your environments look like. And that's across applications, across databases, and so on. So with that, I will turn it back to Serge, and then we can take some questions.
All right. Thank you, Eric. That was a very, very interesting talk, and I think I have to go back and clear out my Lotus archive, at least the stuff that's older than 7 years. Before we go on to questions, just a bit of housekeeping. So if you want to find out more about how your organization can benefit or schedule a demo, you can call us at various phone numbers. I'm not going to read them out here. So there is phone numbers in the US, Canada, and India, and you can also go to ibm.com/planetwide for contact information worldwide. There are a few white papers regarding this topic. So one, proven strategies for archiving complex relational data. There is a solution brief and also an analyst research paper. So the links are of the PDF file. And you can also visit the Infosphere Optim Solutions webpage of ibm.com/optim. The next upcoming DB2 Tech Talk is April 26th, again at 12:30 p.m. So you can go to the registration page to see the title once it becomes available. So it should be reasonably soon. With that, we can open for questions. Operator, please open the phone lines.
Thank you. At this time, if you have questions or comments from the phone lines, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone. Please remember to unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted so we know who to introduce. If you need to withdraw your question, please press *2. And once again, it is *1 on your touch-tone phones if there are questions or comments. We'll wait one moment for any responses. I'm showing no responses, but as a final reminder here, you may press *1 on your touch-tone phones at this time. I'm showing no responses. I can turn it back to you for any closing remarks.
Thank you. Just one last comment also, that you have also the opportunity to ask questions by sending them to the Q&A group in the chat. I don't have any outstanding questions there, so let's just wait a couple of seconds there and see if someone starts violently typing.
I guess I just answered all of the questions in the presentation.
You left.
I'll take it as that, and not that nobody was interested. How's that?
Well, everyone stayed throughout the talk, as far as I can see from the attendance, so that's good. All right. Well, with that, I thank everyone for attending, and replay will be available on channel DB2, and again, you can also download from ibm.com/db2/labchats or the ibm.co webpage that was noted earlier. Thank you for attending.
Thank you all for your participation in the conference. That concludes the call. You may now disconnect. Thank you.